Russia says it is expecting to make direct contact with the Ukrainian delegation in ceasefire talks due to open this week in Istanbul. But it has not revealed who it will be sending to Turkey to represent Moscow. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says it should be the President Vladimir Putin. He's saying he wants to talk to Putin face to face. He urged US President Donald Trump to help secure a meeting between him and Putin on Thursday. Zelenskyy has accused the Russian president of not wanting to negotiate an end to the war. Ukraine's European allies have been pressing Russia to accept an unconditional 30-day ceasefire proposal.
We agree that if there is no real progress this week, we will then work together at the European level to significantly tighten sanctions.
All right, let's get more from DW's Sergei Satanovsky, who is reporting from Riga. Do we have any sense who might be in the Russian delegation on Thursday?
Well, the Kremlin is still keeping this information secret. Putin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, said the names of the Russian delegation will be announced, but only when the president decides it's time. Meanwhile, there have been leaks both in US and Russian media. For example, sources cited by the Washington Post mentioned Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Putin's aide Yuri Ushakov as possible negotiators. So far, Putin himself is not on this list. And if the Russian president doesn't take part, the presidents of Ukraine and the United States are also likely to stay away from these talks. And I should also remind that the Kremlin sees these talks as the next round of the negotiations that started and at some point ended in Istanbul in 2022. And back then, neither the Russian president nor the Ukrainian leader took part in that talks.
All right, so whether Putin is willing to talk or not, he seems certainly unwilling to commit to a ceasefire right now. Tell us more about that.
Well, indeed, Vladimir Putin is clearly trying to avoid any kind of lasting ceasefire unless it directly benefits him, like the short truce during the military parade in Moscow. And the main reason, I guess, is the Kremlin's belief that the situation on the battlefield is currently in Russia's favor. They fear that a ceasefire could change that, and one of the key concerns in the Kremlin and voiced by some officials is that Kiev could use this time to rearm. Some military experts, of course, question this argument. After all, in theory, Russia could also use this time to for resupply, but the likely explanation here is that Russia can't simply rearm as quickly as Ukraine.
And Sergei, how are these talks in Turkey, how are they being portrayed in the Russian media?
Well, overall, Russian media stick closely to the official narrative that Russia is entering these negotiations from the position of strength. According to them, Moscow is even making some concessions, especially considering the situation on the battlefield, as they say, but they never specify what kind of concessions or compromises we can see here. And judging by statements from Russian politicians, the Kremlin is still pushing forward its maximalist demands, including, for example, the handover of Ukrainian territories that Russia hasn't even captured.
That is DW's Sergei Satanovsky reporting from Riga. Sergei, thank you so much for that.
All right, I want to go now to our chief political editor, Michaela Kuffner. She's covering this side of the story for us. Michaela, Merz is threatening to increase sanctions on Moscow if there is no movement on a ceasefire in Ukraine soon. What would those sanctions look like?
Well, he didn't tell any details, but he said that that would likely affect the energy sector and the finance sector. In previous statements, he's hinted that this could also target individuals. So we could see frozen assets, for instance. We could see individuals or whole segments of the finance industry unable to really be part of the global flow of money. But he's saying this after essentially the Russian President Vladimir Putin has to a certain degree called the bluff of those 4 European leaders who headed to Kyiv last Saturday, who called for a ceasefire by Monday. They wanted a 30-day ceasefire as a precondition for talks. Now we're seeing Volodymyr Zelenskyy essentially say he would be willing to still sit down for talks if the fighting stops as the talks begin. And here we also heard from Friedrich Merz today that he feels that Volodymyr Zelenskyy has gone far enough, that it would be unreasonable to ask for any more concessions. So they did raise the bar, these European leaders, and now there is an element of a political risk that they could be seen with their bluff called and not that terribly much happening. So here the next hours will be absolutely crucial in terms of what response we see out of Moscow.
And Michaela, what about Germany providing more military support for Ukraine? Any word on the new German government sending more weapons to Kyiv?
Well, what Friedrich Merz has said since he became Chancellor, because that's really when his words started counting, is that all European partners, as they were standing in Kyiv, would do all they can and are willing to do. So stopping short of whatever it takes, that quote that the Ukrainians have so been waiting for. But he didn't mention the Taurus weapon system, which has become highly symbolic. It's perceived to be largely symbolic here because many military experts also agree that it wouldn't be a complete game changer. But we also hear from the Social Democrat coalition partner that they continue not to want to send this. So Merz says a precondition would be that the other allies are also sending such long-range weapons, which the French and the Brits are already doing. But there's potential conflict in the pipeline on this here within this newly formed coalition as well.
GW's Michaela Kuffner with the latest here in Berlin. Michaela, as always, thank you.